crafty peeps, it's Kat. Welcome to the channel run by 3 crafty kitties and their human servant. Today I have 3 cards for you that are super fast and easy. All you really need to create them is some pattern paper and your paper trimmer. I'll walk you through the examples and we'll show you how to step up some simple designs with minimal amount of craft tools. And as always, I have some tips and tricks sprinkled throughout the video, so make sure you stay until the end. Now let's get started. I'm working with some Paper Rose birthday themed pattern papers today, and first I wanted to quickly show you the papers themselves and to talk you through some of the things you should be looking out for when picking your pattern papers in general. So first, think about the overall size of the card you will be making. If you're sticking with the standard US A2 size, so 4¼ by 5½, you will be better off going with 6x6 sized papers because the print will be better scaled to fit the smaller size. If you're going with US A7 size or 5x7 card, you'll be better off with 12x12 sized pattern papers, again, all because of the scale of the print. Second, when picking your papers, look for the packs that already have the sentiments or printed words included like I have here. This way you don't need to die cut any greetings, you can just trim out the sentiment you want and call it a day. And third, if you're going to be using colored cardstock for your card bases or maybe other elements, try to find the colors that match the colors you already have in your pattern papers. Your design will look way more cohesive this way. Okay, so here I'm going through the Birthday Fun Basics pack, and this pack just has simpler patterns and no sentiments, unlike the first pack that we went through. All of these papers coordinate beautifully with each other, so I feel like no matter how you pair these, you're gonna end up with a nice card. Like, look at this gorgeous scene with this cute puppy. You can trim this image down to size, slap on a sentiment, and voila, your card is ready. Okay, after some back and forth with these papers, I've settled on 3 patterns that I felt matched my sentiments the best. I'm gonna use the one with the candles, the happy cake day, and the one with the balloons. Alright, so first I will trim up my sentiments. You could use scissors here, but I don't trust myself to cut in a straight line for more than an inch, so I'm using my trusty trimmer. I'm carefully aligning the edge of the sentiment with the blade, and once I got the position right, I will make the cut. I'm cutting these apart horizontally first because, well, it's kind of a grid. The images don't exactly align for vertical cuts. My advice is before you make any cuts at all, take a second to look at the direction of your patterns and sentiments to make sure you don't accidentally chop something off in the wrong place. Ask me how I know that. And here's our first cutout sentiment. Next, I will cut my first panel to 4¼ by 5½. Again, look at the patterns first and decide the orientation for your card. I want this one to be portrait as opposed to landscape, so I trimmed my pattern in a portrait orientation as well. And make sure you keep your scraps because those can be easily turned into another card. Then I will turn my paper at an angle and we'll make another card kind of on a diagonal. I don't think it really matters at exactly what angle you cut it, just make sure that you cut it into more or less equal parts. And this one pattern paper can make 2 cards with the pieces I just cut, or 3 if you count that scrap that I just set aside earlier. So first I thought I would just use plain white cardstock for a clean and simple look, but I felt like the balloons looked a little washed out. So I brought in some colored cardstock in this dark teal color, and I'm going with that one instead. The dark teal actually matches the colors on some of the balloons, and I feel like it makes that pattern pop. So I put some liquid glue on my panel and glued it directly to the card front, aligning the edges the best I can. Liquid glue gives you enough slip to kind of slide that panel into place as long as you don't press too hard. Next, I got a scrap of silver glitter cardstock, and I will just cut off a thin strip, roughly 1/8 of an inch, but you really don't need to measure here. And I will glue that silver strip right at the border of my pattern paper, kind of butting it up right against that edge. This makes the panel look more polished and adds just a pop of glitter. Then I'll flip the panel around and we'll cut off the axis, and it's almost ready. All I gotta do is add a sentiment. So I'll bring in that sentiment with the balloons that we trimmed out earlier, and we'll figure out the position for that. What I'll also do is cut a backing for my sentiment, and that's for 2 reasons. One, while this pattern paper is great, it doesn't have the same thickness as cardstock, so gluing another piece behind makes it sturdier. And 2, because we glued that pattern paper right on the panel, it made that bottom portion of the card front thicker, and we now have a difference in height where the pattern paper ends. So I will add an additional piece of cardstock behind my sentiment, but only on the portion that will be glued to the teal part of the panel. I hope that makes sense. I trimmed out another square from a scrap of white cardstock and made a mark where it will be overlapping the teal part of the panel, and I'll cut it with my trimmer. I will then glue that portion to the top of my sentiment. You can skip this step, but I wouldn't recommend it because if you glue your pattern paper sentiment straight on it, like on a card front, it can look a little bit warpy from that height difference. I will then attach the sentiment to my panel while making sure that it's as straight as possible. Our first card is almost complete. We just need to attach it to the card base. I usually like to do this using the corner of my scoreboard, but you can also do without. This is a top folding card base, so I will flip it upside down so that the fold is facing the table. And I'll set it down on the work surface and we'll flip my card front upside down as well. And we'll line those two up and kind of tap on my work surface to make sure that the top edge of the fold is nice and flush. And then I'll check the card from the inside to make sure nothing is sticking out, and I'll press it all down. And there you have it. First card is ready. My second card I'll do in landscape orientation. So I got a plain white panel and my pattern paper with cakes. I will layer these two together until the pattern paper covers roughly about a third of the white panel. And I'll make tick marks with my pencil so I know where I need to cut. I could have measured it exactly to be 1/3, but ain't nobody got time for that. And then I'll trim my pattern paper piece at the spots where I made those tick marks. I will then glue that piece to the bottom of the white panel, lining up the edges. I wanted to step this panel up a bit, so I went through my stamps and pulled out some small stars, and I'll stamp those on the white portion of my background. This is a great way to use those tiny stamps you might have lying around. You can do stars or hearts or little flowers, anything really. I also pulled out a couple of inks that match the colors of my pattern paper, and I'm going in with the light pink first, and I'll test this on a scrap of paper just to get a feel of how well the ink shows up. I will then go and stamp my white panel kind of randomly, really, but I will leave enough white space in between because I will fill that with darker ink later. When you freehand your stamping like this, you can't really go back and restamp the image, so not all of the stamping will come out perfect. And that is totally fine. But I found that it really helps to press and hold your stamp in position for a couple of seconds to give the ink a chance to transfer. So I'm going all around and trying to kind of fill this panel with the little stars. But again, I'm leaving enough space because I'll come in later with the darker ink. Once I'm happy with the amount, I'll switch to the darker color. This is Gina K Light Orchid, and it's a really pretty purpley kind of color. It's not exactly pink, it's not exactly purple, but it goes really well with the colors of the cakes on my pattern paper. So I'll repeat the process here, going around my panel and filling in those blanks. I will stamp some stars off the edge of my panel and will even flip my acrylic block with the stamp kind of upside down. This really doesn't need to be perfect. We are just filling in the background. Here I wanted to show you a simple masking hack. I kind of want to stamp my stars down below, but I don't want to go onto the pattern paper itself. So I'll grab a sticky note and we'll line it up right against the edge where the pattern paper ends. And now I can stamp right on top without worrying about my pattern paper. So I'll go all around and stamp my stars in all of the blank spaces that I left the first time around. Next, I went through my stash of colorful gel pens and picked out colors that were the closest to my color palette. And then I went in and drew little dots of different sizes all over the background. I just wanted to add a little bit of sparkle, and that did the trick. Similar to the first card, I trimmed a thin glitter strip from a scrap piece of pink glitter cardstock, and I'm gluing it right along the border of my pattern paper. I will then trim this entire panel to 3 3/4 by 5 so that I will have a nice frame border all around. I'm trying to maintain proportions here of the pattern paper taking up about 1/3 of my background, and this doesn't matter as much on the sides, but I'll trim the top and the bottom by 1/4 inch each to maintain that ratio. Just be mindful here of where you're making your cuts. I will then glue my trimmed panel to a white card base while making sure that I get the border as even as possible on all sides, and I'll press it all down to adhere. For my sentiment for this card, I did the same thing with the backing piece, and I actually used the scrap piece that I practiced my stamping on earlier. It's gonna be in the back, and no one will ever know it. I made a mark where I will need my sentiment to be supported and just cut it with scissors. Then I glued that scrap piece behind the sentiment, and I'll glue the whole thing to the panel, making sure it's as straight as I can get it. And our second card is ready. I think it came out super cute. For my third card, I did the same type of stamped background, but in portrait orientation, and I stamped my stars a little wonkier this time. I also used green because it would tie in better with the sentiment, with the birthday candles that we cut earlier. I had a scrap piece of this candle print, so I will use that instead of cutting up a whole new sheet. I glued it to the bottom of the panel, and similar to the other two cards, I added a thin strip to the edge, but this time in gold. I then trimmed off all of the excess and then further trimmed this panel by 1/4 inch on all sides because I wanted to maintain my ratio of pattern paper to the background. I then adhered it to my green tab folding card base, making sure my border is even, and all we got left is the sentiment. I've already glued the additional piece behind it for support, and then I'll add it to my panel, trying to center it the best I can. And our third card is done. Let's take a look at all of the completed cards. All three of these took me about 35-40 minutes to create, so roughly about 12-ish minutes per card. I think that's pretty good, and really the only tool you needed for these was the trimmer. And here I wanted to show you how you can step these designs up if you had a few more tools at your disposal. For the balloon card, I used that second half of the paper we cut in the very beginning, and I glued it to some teal cardstock and then die cut an arched panel from that. I also used the striped pattern paper for my background. And by the way, all of my panels were popped up with some foam tape for additional dimension. For the cake card, the only thing I did differently was stamp the background with a birthday themed background stamp. And the same thing for the candle card, but I moved the sentiment to be on the right side instead of center. And of course, I added some shinies and bedazzle to the cards because why not? Let me know in the comments which card is your favorite. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!